Welcome to the pot. What's left of it anyway.
Midnight Mass opens on a death. A cruel and unnecessary death at that. A fitting opening for a Mike Flanagan Netflix show. Pieces of art fixated on death. What it is, how we deal with it, and what comes after. Mike Flanagan's first Netflix show was The Haunting of Hill House, a horror about death in a family that used ghosts to explore trauma and complicated family dynamics. He then followed it with The Haunting of Bly Manor, an anthology follow-up that explored death and romantic relationships. Both of these phenomenal shows were covered better than I ever could do by my dear friend Lady Knight the Brave, and you should go watch her pieces on those. While Midnight Mass is the most recent to release, it actually predates both of the other shows. In a piece about creating the show, Mike says he began writing the first version of it as a novel around 2010, that there was a feature script around 2012 from before he began prepping Oculus the summer of that year. The following year, he had a more advanced script, but
I was well over 150 pages into the draft. Riley Flynn and Father Paul Hill were having their first consequential conversation about alcohol. This would later become their first AA meeting scene. 150 pages is longer than most finished screenplays, and I wasn't even close to the midpoint yet. This thing was always too big to be a movie.
He brought it to Jeff Howard, who he co-wrote Oculus and Before I Wake with, and Trevor Macy, who produced both in 2014, and they began to pitch it. Everyone turned them down, including Blair Fetter at Netflix, who, only a few years later, would pick up a different show from Mike Flanagan, The Haunting of Hill House. In the meantime, Mike would sneak Midnight Mass in other places. As the book written by Kate Siegel's character in Hush,
they'd twinkle with red, blue, and yellow light, just as the damned Jesus fish had when it pulled him out of the fog and into hell.
Kate and Mike co-wrote Hush, and he felt that including Midnight Mass this way
might be as close as that story would ever get to being made.
In 2016, he would put it as the book on the shelf in his adaptation of Gerald's Game.
A blink and you miss it moment, but for a few seconds, Midnight Mass was still alive.
After the success of Hill House, and while making the deal for creating Bly Manor, the follow-up season, Midnight Mass would gain life once more, being greenlit by Netflix and the writers' rooms occurring simultaneously. Mike going from Bly Manor in the morning to Midnight Mass in the afternoon. And, after Bly Manor finished, they started pre-production, and then had to sit there for a year after finishing pre-production because the event happened. Several changes had to be made due to the panini. The oil spill, for example, was added as an explanation for the small number of people on the island in the show, caused by the small number of extras they could have on set. Luckily, the year of waiting resulted in the sets being drastically improved by plant growth and weathering. They were Netflix's test case on how to do production after the apocalypse. This story is deeply personal to Mike. He calls Riley Flynn
my most imperfect avatar.
Because Riley's journey was reflective of his own, with alcoholism and with faith. He was raised Catholic, served as an altar boy for many years until he went to college. There he would find that
for as many years as I attended weekly mass, and despite a life spent in Catholic school, I actually understood very little about Catholicism.
So he read the Bible, and then studied Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism.
Looking at various religions, I was moved and amazed by their propensity for forgiveness and faith, but horrified by their exclusionism, tribalism, and tendency towards fanaticism and fundamentalism. Around
this time, he began to come to grips that he was an alcoholic, and that Midnight Mass
faded in on my worst, most ingrained anxiety. Not that I would die because of my drinking, but that I would kill someone else and live.
He is now 3 years sober, an achievement worth celebrating. These 3 shows have an extremely intimate feeling that permeates throughout. A deep level of human vulnerability, of the best and worst of what we are capable of. Midnight Mass is also a show about community. And while much of its writing was deeply intimate for Mike, it's a collaborative piece of art. The writing was particularly affected by Mike's brother James, as well as staff writers Joyce Sherry, who had mostly written for short films, and Teresa Sutherland, writer of the 2018 film The Wind. Midnight Mass also involves many of the people behind and in front of the camera from previous Mike Flanagan works. The soundtrack was composed by the Newton brothers, who have worked on every Mike Flanagan project from Oculus in 2013 onward. I adore their work, particularly in the Netflix shows. Returning cast members from previous shows include Mike's wife and frequent collaborator Kate Siegel playing Erin Green, a school teacher and expectant mother who recently returned to the island. She played Viola in Bly Manor and Theo in Hill House. Rahul Kohli plays Hassan El-Shabazz, the Muslim sheriff of the Crockpot and a single father. He played Owen on Bly Manor. Samantha Sloyan is Bev Keane, the fanatical Christian manipulative church lady. She played Lee Crane in Hill House. As a note, it's impressive that she manages to be so deeply unlikable in this role, and I hope people will not treat her poorly for doing such an excellent job. Dr. Sarah Gooning, the town's lesbian doctor who wants to leave but is staying for her mother, suffering from Alzheimer's, is played by Annabeth Gish, who was Miss Dudley in Hill House. Alex Esso plays Mildred Gooning, Sarah's aging mother and one of the only people who remembers Father Pruitt as a young man. She was Charlotte Wingrave in Bly Manor. Henry Thomas returns after playing Hugh Crane, the not-great dad of the Crane family in Hill House, and Henry Wingrave, the not-great secret dad from Bly Manor, to play Riley's not-so-great dad, Ed Flynn.
I guess I've harbored some resentment for you.
Finally, Robert Longstreet plays Joe Colley, the guilt-ridden local alcoholic who, in an accident with a gun, paralyzed Lisa Scarborough. He was Mr. Dudley in Hill House. New actors to the Flanagan TV crew are Zach Gilford as Riley Flynn, who returns to the island after spending 4 years in prison for murdering a girl in a collision while drunk driving. Hamish Linklater is the charismatic, deeply misguided, and self-righteous Father Paul Hill. Kristen Lehman as Riley's mother, Annie, and Igby Riney as his brother, Warren, who is an altar boy. Rahul Aburi plays Sheriff Hassan's son, Ali. Anara Simone plays Lisa Scarborough, who was paralyzed after being shot by Joe Colley. She is devoutly Christian. Michael Trucco plays the town mayor and Lisa's father, Wade, and Crystal Balint plays Lisa's mom, Dolly. Finally, Matt Bidell plays the town's ferryman and boat mechanic, Sturge, and Louis Oliver plays Warren Flynn's friend and fellow altar boy, Ooker. Also, some of these actors appeared in previous Mike Flanagan movies. So now you know who everyone is. Let's do a very fast recap. We open on the aftermath of a collision where Riley Flynn, after getting blackout drunk, crashed into and killed a woman. 4 years later, after getting out of jail, Riley returns to Crockett Island where he grew up. Things are strained between him and his parents, particularly his dad, especially after he admits that he's no longer Christian. His dad mandates that he attend Mass every weekend.
You can consider it a condition of your parole.
We also learn a recent oil spill heavily damaged industry here. Meanwhile, Monsignor Pruitt, the elderly priest and head of the local parish, has been gone on a 2-week trip to Jerusalem, but has not returned as expected on the ferry, irritating Bev Keane, the church organizer. That night, Warren, Ali, and Ooker go out to the Uppards, a smaller island filled with wild cats. They see something moving in the bushes.
I guess it was Harpoon Harry. Comet at last.
There's an incoming storm, and the town prepares. We see a meeting where Hassan suggests bunkering in the school if needed, but Bev angrily says that people have always stayed at the church. As well, Bev meets Father Paul Hill, a mysterious priest who came to the island with a trunk that makes a weird noise. The day of the storm, the town attends church and are shocked by the new priest. He takes an interest in Riley, who's lapsed in his faith and seems to know a lot about the town's residents, supposedly from Pruitt, who he says is on the mainland recovering after falling ill on his trip.
You know, like a liar.
That night during the storm, Riley sees a figure in the outfit of Monsignor Pruitt, but it runs away. The next morning, hundreds of dead cats have washed up on the shore. End Book 1. The sheriff says they should burn the dead cats in case of disease, with Riley helping and the mayor being apprehensive about it. The town gathers for Ash Wednesday celebration. The moment of fun is ruined when Joe Colley's dog brutally dies by rat poison because of Bev. Joe is a town outsider because of his drinking, and he's not the only one. Sarah sits with her girlfriend and feels the judgmental stare of Father Hill.
But I think we're upsetting your clergy.
Hassan goes to talk to Bev.
That I'm just following up on our little island mystery. We confirmed it was poison.
Oh, that's tragic.
You know, like a liar.
Hassan knows that Bev killed Pike but can't prove it, frustrating Joe, but also showing Joe that other people can care about him. Father Paul, as a favor to Riley, starts running AA meetings with him on the island so he does not need to get on a ferry to attend his court-mandated AA. Others see the seeming figure of Pruitt through their windows, scaring them. And late at night, the town's drug dealer Bull, played by John C. MacDonald, is killed by a monstrosity. At church, Father Paul seemingly performs a miracle as Lisa is suddenly able to walk when he offers communion. End Book 2. Because of the miracle, the church is now seeing a resurgence of members, but during a mass, Father Paul collapses. Throughout the episode, we intercut with Father Paul revealing that he is Monsignor Pruitt, and what happened to him. Pruitt was senile, and after getting lost in Jerusalem, wandered into the desert during a storm, finding an ancient ruin. He's then killed and resurrected by Nosferatu, who he thought was an angel, and he awakens young again. Paul says he's confessing about lying to the congregation before he sins, all while trying to justify that the lying is correct and good. We see other Christians are healing from various things. Lisa and Warren, who had been flirting in the previous episode, sneak out and kiss on a canoe. There's a scene of argument between Hassan and Bev at the school, and we see that fanatical Christian beliefs are taking root in several people within the town. We also see that the supposed miracles are swaying Ali as well. Hassan and he have an argument that evening about faith. The second AA meeting occurs. All you need to know is Joe is now attending as well. Riley and he bonding as they walk home. We learn that Joe's sister died and he regrets not visiting her before she died. Meanwhile, Father Paul seemingly dies, spewing blood, violently convulsing, and then stopping as we end on Bev, Wade, Sturge, and Dolly in shock at what's occurring. End Book 3. We open with Erin going for an ultrasound and receiving devastating news. She lost her child. Even more disturbingly, there's no evidence she was ever pregnant. In a show with brutal and often gory horror, this moment is one of the most disturbing. Made all the worse later in the episode when Erin's gone to the mainland and the doctor, unintentionally, is gaslighting her about her having been pregnant in a way eerily familiar to anyone who's had a bad doctor. Anyway, Pruitt resurrects as a vampire. There's only one thing worse than a vampire. Boom. A Christian. No! Riley goes out on his dad's commercial fishing boat, and his dad admits he feels guilty for not being a good enough father, and they discuss their difficulties of connecting with each other. Sarah tests her mother's blood, and we see it burned in one of my favorite uses of split diopter ever. Erin seeks comfort with Riley, and they pray together. He stays with her throughout the day, and that night they discuss the philosophy of death. Meanwhile, Pruitt's thirsty for blood.
Blood? Blood.
Mildred is conscious of her surroundings now, so she recognizes Pruitt. Joe finds Pruitt consuming the last of the chunky blood wine, and then he recognizes that he's not Paul Hill, but that he's Pruitt. Pruitt hugs and then kills him. This scene hurts to watch. The following day, Bev finds him and the body and convinces Wade and Sturge to help cover up the murder. Riley and Pruitt have AA that night, and Pruitt says Joe is visiting his sister.
You know, like a liar.
After dinner, Riley goes to meet with Erin as they had planned, but then heads back to the hall because of Pruitt's lie, and the Nosferatu has him for a midnight meal. End Book 4. The following day, Erin tries to find Riley. Mildred's now looking much younger, and Bull's mother comes to report her son missing to Hassan. Mass is now only being held at night.
No morning masses at all?
Erin reports Riley missing. Sarah takes Mildred to Mass, where Pruitt has a disturbingly reminiscent of fascists' speech, which causes Mildred, upon leaving, to say she and Sarah are never going back. Riley comes to Erin's house that night, and they go out on the rowboat where emotions happen. This rowboat's the emotion set? Anyway, he explains what happened, that he was killed and resurrected into a vampire, that there was ideological debate between him and Pruitt, where Pruitt says, "Nah, we're not vampires, we're angels, I swear, please, believe me, seriously, come to Jesus. We've got murder and blood." After this, Pruitt thinks Riley will be an apostle.
God chooses his vessels, Beverly.
Considering that Riley's confession to Erin ends up stopping the spread of the virus off the island, this is an interesting statement. Riley wrote letters to various people, and now we catch back up to him and Erin in the boat. As he ends the story, she asks why he brought her out there, and he says it was to isolate himself. As the sun rises and burns him away, he sees the girl who he killed, who has haunted him each night, appear whole again, and she reaches out, and we cut back to Erin's devastating screams. If you don't hit the skip to next episode button, her anguish continues over the entire credits.
Except, it's a terrible day for rain.
End Book 5. Aaron returns to the island, goes and speaks with Sarah, and they piece together that some virus that affects blood is being spread by the church on purpose. Bev and Pruitt are worried who Riley told because Pruitt can feel that he has died through the blood. Ed gives Riley's letter to Pruitt and is worried about where Riley is because of what was in the letter to him. In the letter to Pruitt, Riley only wrote, "Remember we are dust, and to dust we shall return," which is a perfect fuck you from beyond the grave. Sarah tells Hassan what's happening in a scene we will dig into later. The Christians trap everyone on the island and disable the power. It's time for the titular midnight mass. The heroes come to investigate and to try to stop things. Pruitt kills Sturge with poison so he reawakens. Hassan tries to leave as the angel, or Nosferatu, appears. Hassan tries to stop things as Ali gets culted, and Hassan is tackled. Mildred shoots Pruitt in the head and is carried off by the creature. Everyone runs from the church through the back as hell breaks loose. Pun intended. And
I mean, you could shoot me right now. It just mean I'm 5 minutes behind.
Die, vampire! Die!
End Book 6. They escape to Aaron's house, but Bev finds them and has Sturge lighted on fire. Annie sacrifices herself to give the others time. Bev lights the buildings on fire, claiming it's revelation, as the vampires tear across the island, murdering everyone. Mildred and Pruitt talk, and Pruitt's like, sorry for his mass murders. The mass murders he caused. Fuck you, Pruitt. Everyone helps to get Lisa and Warren to the canoe and then burn the rest of the boat so the vampires can't escape. We find out Pruitt is Sarah's dad, actually. Sarah coats the church in oil, but is then shot by Sturge and dies, rejecting her father's blood as he tries to resurrect her. Hassan and Aaron both sacrifice themselves to burn the rec center, and Ali is the one who lights the center on fire. Hassan and Ali pray to Allah one last time. Bev, like a little bitch, claws at the ground trying to live. Everyone else sings, trying to forgive themselves and each other for the horrors they have done.
That's what it means to have faith, that in the darkness, in the worst of it, in the absence of light and hope, we sing.
And the sun rises on a smoldering crocket, as Lisa says,
I can't feel my legs.
End of show. Before we get going, I want to quickly say when Lisa was magically cured, I was a bit iffy if it might touch on some ableist tropes. But the last line, the line of hope at the end of the night, is that she's her disabled self again, and that's pretty cool. Also, the vampire rulebook for this show is you drink vamp blood, and then die, and that's when you become a vampire. As well, there's a fucking abysmal line in the second episode that, considering current conversations on reproductive rights, was irresponsible to include in the way that they did.
Pregnant people, pregnant women, I guess.
Yeah, tend to be women.
And look, trans men and non-binary people get pregnant. You really could have just left it at people and be supportive instead of whatever this was meant to be. Lastly, the only thing that pulls me out of the show is that none of them notice they're drinking chunky blood wine. Like, the consistency is clearly different. They know, right? Right?
I am not evangelizing.
Before we begin discussing Christianity in more depth, let's set some ground rules. If you're already typing out a comment along the lines of, what about insert other religion in a different nation's context? I would ask you to please delete it right now and save us both the trouble. I'm here to critique Christianity because that's what is being primarily discussed by the show, and where I live and with my life experiences, it's the belief systems systemically oppressing people like me and the members of those other religions. And finally, in a global, historical, and modern context, Christianity is responsible for harm on a scale no other religion can remotely rival. Secondly, if you're Christian, I'm going to say things that should make you uncomfortable. I promise it's not all negative. I'm not here to rant and rave about evil Christians, because this topic is much more complicated than that, and I don't care for your belief system's view on essentializing, as I'll explain later. I want to discuss power and belief and how people have used your religion as a weapon, so please stick through it. I promise it's leading to a positive message at the end. Also, I'm only sharing what I feel comfortable sharing about my experiences. I would ask you to respect my boundaries and be conscientious in any questions you ask about that. Lastly, if a critique does not apply to you or your specific denomination or church, that's a good thing, because it means you have achieved some of the change this video is discussing. As Christianity is a heavily factionalized and fragmented belief system, not all critiques can or will apply to all subgroups. I will cover my personal experiences in depth in the next section, but look, I did my fucking time.
Virginity is cool. He's got it. He's got virginity is cool.
Proselytizing is a core aspect of much of Christianity. Spreading the good word, as they call it. In the second episode, the potentially infectious bodies of hundreds of dead cats wash up on the shore after the storm, and we see the mayor and sheriff speaking about it.
Figured we'd burn him in case it's disease.
But the mayor is apprehensive.
And that seems a little drastic. You know, we've had strange things happen before.
See, while Hassan is actually trying to handle the situation, the mayor is interested in continuously pushing to get Hassan and Ali to attend Mass at the local church.
And I know that you hop the ferry and you spend your Sundays on mainland for mosque, but Fridays. Oh, Fridays. Well, then you're here Sundays, which is perfect.
In the process, he demonstrates his ignorance towards Muslim religious practices, getting the wrong day for congregational prayer. For context, Fridays are an important day of prayer in Islam. Here's an excerpt from an explanation written by Dr. Rose Aslan, Assistant Professor of Global Islam in the Department of Religion at California Lutheran University.
The Quran invokes the importance of Friday as a sacred day of worship in a chapter called Al-Jum'ah, meaning the day of congregation, which is also the word for Friday in Arabic. It states, "O you who believe, when you are called to congregational prayer, hasten to the remembrance of God and leave off trade. That is better for you, if you but knew." Muslims believe Friday was chosen by God as a dedicated day of worship.
To the mayor, being part of the community inherently involves being connected to the church. The mayor is, by all means, whether he intends to or not, reinforcing an in-group, out-group mentality around being Christian and part of the community, or being not Christian and not part of the community. He is a parallel to many real-world American and Canadian politicians, often conservative,
and I believe in God, that God has blessed America,
who create these types of separation. He wants to coerce Hassan into being part of the Catholic Church to be able to make him more part of the community, but in so doing is alienating him. The mayor is, at least for the most part, well-meaning in his statements, which is in contrast to Bev. In episode 6, Dr. Sarah asks Hassan to investigate the church, saying,
"It's a lot to ask, I know."
Do you?
Hassan explains why he came to the island.
I was 21 when the towers went down. Watched on TV in my dorm room just weeping. But I went to the mosque that day because they had a blood drive.
Because he wanted to help, he went to New York to take NYPD training. His friends disagreed, saying the cops were against them, but Hassan wanted to.
I'll show them. They don't have to be afraid of us.
And he eventually made it onto the top secret Joint Terrorism Task Force, and they were going after
petty stuff, pot, parking tickets, and leaning on them hard if they're Muslim. I thought we were supposed to be fighting terrorists.
He complained a single time, and because of that was surveilled. The cops started suspecting Muslim officers.
And they fucking panicked. And more, I realize I've lost their trust. I keep my head high, dignity.
Rami Ismail, Muslim game developer and generally wonderful guy who you should be following on Twitter, said of this moment in response to Rahul Kohli,
"Thank you for putting so much into that. The finger up at the heavens that I keep my head high, the defeated pride and dignity. It's me. It's my father. It's every Muslim I know. We all tried not to be them, but to some, it never mattered either way."
Hassan continues, dignity was something his wife encouraged.
And then she's diagnosed, and she's robbed of her dignity.
So he left. He got away from it. Hassan went in thinking he could change the racist system of policing from the inside to be one of the good ones, and by the end understood that there's no way that would ever be possible with the structural flaws of policing in America. So he left to try and make change in a small town. He is still technically law enforcement, but he doesn't wear a gun. He doesn't charge and punish Joe, but instead puts him somewhere safe for the night when he's drunk and gives him a coffee in the morning. But he's not just trying to change the cops, he was trying to show that Muslims were not the bundle of racist stereotypes pushed by certain groups, often Christian. He's probably my favorite character in the show. I know what it's like to be an outsider, and I know what it's like as a queer person to realize that you'll never be one of the good ones. That the concept in and of itself is faulty. It's not how bigots and structural bigotry work. Bev throughout the show makes various comments towards Hassan that are quite negative while actively trying to get Ali to join the Christians. In the second to last episode, the group of Christians trying to make people vampires have begun the titular midnight mass. We see the culmination of Ali's conflict in wanting to be connected to the community.
Fuck my dad. That's what you want to hear, right?
And his connection to Islam and his dad. Ali has attended a couple of masses before this one against his dad's wishes and already drank blood, and here he drinks the poison at the behest of Bev. One of the show's strongest scenes of horror is through this moment of Ali being pulled away from his dad by the Christians. As my friend who's had this happen to a family member of theirs calls it, he got culted. It's extra horrific on a second watch, knowing what comes later and what Bev has to say about Hassan in the final episode.
Oh, I knew. The day you set foot on this island, of course you would, terrorist.
If you had been paying attention, Bev's Islamophobia was quite obvious, but here it's brought to the forefront, and it's on seeing this that Ali breaks from them and is ultimately a hero, burning the last building they can hide in, preventing the vampires from being able to spread. And as the sun rises, he and his father pray to Allah one last time, together, as Hassan had wanted to do for much of the latter half of the show.
I miss you praying. It'd mean a lot to me if you joined me.
Ali did the one thing Bev needed him not to do. He questioned their narrative. Many Christian denominations very rarely encourage curiosity and questioning of God and Jesus.
We must trust in the Lord with our whole heart and not rely on our own insights.
A contrast with many other religions. The show even addresses this point with the interactions between Sheriff Hassan and Bev in the scene in the school. For context, Bev had given Hassan's son Ali a copy of the Christian Bible. As a non-Muslim, it's not my place to judge the validity of the representation of their beliefs and faith. However, based on my conversations with Muslim people in my life before seeing the show, and the statements of various Muslim people who have seen the show, and my friend Adnan, who was kind enough to provide sensitivity reading on this piece, the scene is, in the words of many Muslims on Twitter, one of the only examples of an accurate portrayal of the Muslim view on Jesus. As a note, there has been some criticism of not casting a Muslim actor, as Rahul Kohli is not a member of that faith, but the vast majority of the response I have seen towards his casting by Muslims has been positive. Either way, more Muslim actors should be getting cast in sympathetic, positive roles like this. In the words of Hassan,
Muslims believe that Jesus is a prophet of God and that the Injil, the Bible, was revealed to him as the Torah was revealed to Moses before that. See, we love Jesus.
I guarantee many of you didn't know that. Christians often represent Muslim people as being out to destroy their faith, and most of all as hating Jesus, which is just genuinely untrue. Returning to the scene, Hassan says,
After the time of Jesus, thanks to the interference of men, there were deviations in Christianity. People altered the message. Priests, popes, kings. That's why there's so many versions of the Bible.
The show actually directly acknowledges this several times. The alterations occur in many different ways. One highlighted by the show is translation. In the first episode, we get an example.
It was a nice surprise to hear the old translation again. We haven't heard that in, 10 years, Andy?
Yeah.
I know the new missal is closer to the original Latin.
Which is funny, because the original's not in Latin. The Latin's actually a translation of the original Greek, and with very little of the Greek surviving, we're actually getting translation of a translation. Sometimes it goes as far as being a translation of a translation of a translation, depending on the version. If you're not multilingual, it may be difficult to understand that translating meaning, especially across time, is difficult. For a simple example, take a non-literal saying like, break a leg. If translated literally, without the cultural context, instead of meaning good luck, it may just be confusing or insulting. So, people translating make choices that may change meaning. A good example of Christian translation altering things, in the Torah, in the first sentence of the Parsha Bereshit, the sentence means in a beginning. Christians translated this as in the beginning, which means creationism is based on a fucking mistranslation. I have linked a piece from a rabbi if you want to know more about this translation specifically. And that's just potentially accidental changes, but what happens when people in power purposefully alter things? Well, that's how you get versions like the infamous King James Bible, which is the Bible used by many far-right conservative groups to justify various harmful viewpoints. The line justifying homophobia, for example, is a mistranslation of the Torah that is not perfectly agreed on, but is generally thought by rabbis to mean a man should not lie with a young boy/child. Some believe it also means no incest on top of no pedophilia. There's an article in the sources about that debate. Many versions come from the ideological manipulations of Christian monarchs. Many translations were made with an ideological, purposeful goal in mind. I could spend years covering just the effects of translation and alteration of the Christian Bible, but we don't have that kind of time. Hassan finishes his explanation with,
We do, though, believe that the Bible contains some of the original Word of God. But we also believe that God revealed the Quran as the final message, never to be altered.
My friend Adnan had a comment on this section.
My dad always stressed to me that Christians were our allies. So much so that when my mom sent me to this very Christian summer camp when I was a kid, he wasn't happy about it, but he did tell me to learn as much as possible in an effort to explore my own faith at the time, though he did ask me not to attend church services.
Throughout Hassan's explanation, Bev inserts small, judgmental, but technically in sentence structure, polite statements.
And we love the message that was revealed to him.
Well, I suppose we learn something new every day.
When Hassan finishes, Bev responds,
I don't think that this is the place to discuss where our beliefs about Scripture might diverge.
See, Bev's proselytizing in her role at the school, but upon encountering someone else explaining their beliefs, suddenly secularism of the school matters again. Hassan quickly points this out.
Exactly. See, Muslims encourage everyone to seek knowledge, so I am more than comfortable with my son studying a Bible. But where I think there's an issue, this is a public school.
As Hassan is stressed throughout, the problem's not the access to knowledge, it's the pushing of Christianity onto children by an institutional power, something that occurs in public schools in the US. The ACLU, in a statement on their website, says that,
since the 1960s, the federal courts have therefore made it crystal clear that officially sponsored prayer and proselytizing is not acceptable in the school environment. Nonetheless, each year we receive countless reports from students, parents, and teachers detailing flagrant constitutional violations. It even cites the exact examples discussed in this scene. In-class daily prayer led by teachers, the distribution of Bibles to students. As some of the complaints they often receive, few Christians would be okay if the same thing was done with a different religion's text. As Hassan points out,
if I went around handing out copies of the Quran to the children on this island, in the interest of the pursuit of knowledge, well, I'd expect you chase me out of town, Miss Keene.
Bev then proceeds to end the scene on a grand preaching moment where she completely ignores what Hassan had to say to declare how recent events show they are in miraculous times. Some of you may see Bev as an exaggerated representation of a specific type of Christian, but at least with my life experience, she's one of the most realistic antagonists I've ever seen in media, a perfect representation of certain people in my life. I guess it's time I explain my relationship with this religion and its systems.
As for the rest of them, let God sort them out.
The first time I was told I didn't deserve to live, I was 6 years old, and it wasn't the last. Another kid on the bus decided to put all their anger and misery onto me, but of all the things said, only one stuck with me to the point of remembering it. You don't deserve to live. A sentiment I was continuously told explicitly and implicitly. Your existence is wrong. You are wrong. What you are is a wrong. For context, I'm disabled and queer, and I attended a French immersion Catholic school as a kid. Attending Catholic school as the non-Christian, as other kids called me on many occasions, was extremely lonely. I mostly read books as an escape into the fantastical, in particular the absolutely incredible Tintin in both French and English, the wonderful Percy Jackson books, and many different films. I needed media and fantasy because the real world was too much, and even that I was punished for. I used to get detention for reading books too much, even though I always had my homework done, because my treatment was not just from my peers, but from the institution, from the teachers and adults who were meant to be there to protect me. The good old Christian boy teacher I had in grade 8 once said to my mom, "Dead name wouldn't get bullied so much if they didn't bring it on to themselves." My existence was wrong, and my treatment merely the fair and valid punishment for it, at least in their minds. See, if I defended myself, if I got angry, if I responded to the endless, incessant physical assaults, violations of my space, theft of my property, and constant, ceaseless dehumanization, then I was the problem. Many of the kids who bullied me did so out of their own pain. It doesn't make it okay, but I do not hold much resentment towards many of them. But I do towards the system that never helped any of them and actively pushed them into unhealthily unloading their problems onto other people. A system that encouraged the perpetuation of cycles of violence in pain, a Christian system. A system that said, if you just conform and be normal how we want you to, then you won't receive your righteous punishment, which you're not allowed to fight against, because you are the sin. Any harm done in the name of enforcing Christian viewpoint was to them justified. Many Christians will talk about their accepting nature. As with a lot of things that we'll talk about, what they say they are rarely reflects their actions. I find it ironic how often conservative evangelicals yell about virtue signaling. I don't know any group more experienced at doing it. One of the most fascinating things to me growing up was how people would behave so drastically different the instant they realized I was not Christian. Sometimes in subtle ways and sometimes in blatant ways, I would go from part of the room to an alien intruder. I don't think most of them were fully aware that their behavior had changed, but it was obvious to me. I remember when my mum was going through chemo and people found it at school. I think I heard the phrase, "it's all part of God's plan," somewhere in the thousands of times. It's interesting how much one phrase can mean so many different things, depending on who says it and how. See, the Bev types, they said it as a subtle, polite barb. It's what you get, godless heathen, being the real message. Others took it as a way to try and convince me if I was more devout, it would help. Ironically, things in my life got better the instant I had developed complete and utter disdain for the entire system. I think that's just coincidence, though, and the wonderful doctors who helped my mum. Very rarely, it was meant to be comforting. Even when it was, it had the complete opposite effect. There's nothing comforting in being told your mother having cancer is actually just part of God's loving plan. Especially not when you've watched your mum's friend consumed by the same thing. Especially not when that phrase was used as some statement about my body and chronic illness either. I was sick a lot as a kid. My immune system doesn't work super well. I missed a whole month of school because of scarlet fever one time. Another time I missed over a month due to whooping cough. My peers, teachers, and school did not like this. I was constantly treated as some villainous liar because of my disability, despite every time I got sick getting a test showing I had it and a note from my doctor. And if I was not a sinner for lying, then I was just being punished for being a sinner for something else. This treatment was what I got from nearly everyone I knew at school. Even my supposed friends would play the stay away game, which is where they ran and hid from me in an attempt to get me to cry. And when almost everyone you know has continuously pushed that message onto you as a child, has pushed that you're worthless and don't deserve to live, and that this comes from God's divine judgment, at a certain point, it starts to seep intrusively into your own thoughts. I tell you this because you need to understand a large aspect of my relationship to both Christianity and to myself, so you understand the context in which I related to Midnight Mass, so when I talk about various characters, my feelings of connection with them has sense. But I promise my past and this video has a positive direction. But we're not there yet. You have to go through the rest to get to the positive at the end. Lastly, my experience is not unique. I've spoken with an uncomfortably large number of other disabled queer people living in various countries, in various Christian denominations, schools, and churches with tragically similar stories to mine. As such, I related to Midnight Mass at a very intimate level.
Those who've been coming to church and taking communion, they have nothing to fear tonight.
Earlier I mentioned my distaste for Christian essentializing, so let's explain what I mean. Christians often essentialize people as good or evil, saintly or devilish, faithful or sinners, that your immortal soul may be tainted by sin and cleansed only by the church and God. Christians believe that a sinner's soul will be sent to hell to be punished for eternity for their sin, and that the righteous followers of Christ will live life everlasting in heaven. Sin's a strange concept in Christianity. It's often defined by political needs of powerful figures. It as a concept has been used to justify various actions throughout history in a variety of ways, and justify hatred towards various groups. This is also an area where denominations differ a lot. It's actually what leads to some of the largest divisions in the various Christian denominations. Part of the reason for the existence of early Protestantism was, amongst other things, the selling of indulgences. The selling of indulgences was a process at the time whereby a person could pay the church to be pre-forgiven for a sin, a clever method of getting rich people to provide money that the church could use for decadence and extravagance. In the third episode, Father Paul /Pruitt does something reminiscent of this by confessing to lying to the congregation about what happened to him before he's even lied, because he thinks that this sin will result in a positive for the church.
Bless me, Lord, for I am going to sin.
It's in principle the same thing, admonishing a sin before it occurs because it benefits the church and priests, but it also touches on a specific aspect of the way many Christians view confessional. Now, to be clear, there are many others who would balk at this, including better priests, but many Christians view confessional as a way to absolve themselves of any sin just so they can get into heaven. While the importance of confessing sinful action does appear in Christian Bibles, the form it takes in modern Christian denominations is drastically different from that concept, particularly in the case of Catholics. It's to be done directly to a priest who, upon giving absolution, has forgiven the person and cleansed their soul.
I heard your confession today, and God forgave you.
This also means that if someone is not a Christian, then they are sinning by not following God, and hey, look at that. A built-in justification for proselytizing, because forcing your beliefs onto other people is saving them from hell. On top of that, some people take absolution as free rein to sin in a way that they think will help Christianity, or more often themselves. As we see with Paul in the 3rd episode and later, he believes any harmful actions justified, even though he openly recognizes that he's doing wrong.
Bless me, Lord, for I am going to sin.
On top of this, essentializing someone as a sinner allows for a certain type of Christian to feel justified in punishing them, because sin is divinely deserving of punishment through the concept of sinners' souls receiving eternal damnation and punishment in hell. Essentializing allows for a type of thinking where doing horrific actions is both justified and easily forgivable, even righteous. I think one of the most horrifying aspects of some Christians' view is that they are right in doing harm because it's done out of love.
And so I have a friend that was born a male, is now identifying as a female. Out of love for them, should I use the feminine pronoun for them?
That's like saying, I believe that God made sugar and that sugar is good. And yet out of love for my neighbor, I want to let him put cyanide in his coffee if he calls it sugar.
I've heard a saying before, there's no hate quite like Christian love, and there's no one with a more toxic love than Pruitt, to the point that it's visually shown through the blood. Pruitt believes he's bringing everlasting life by forcing his beliefs, represented by the blood, into people. He believes he's doing something for his daughter because he loves her, but it's one-directional and unhealthy, and she spits it out, rejecting it in the last episode. His creepy yearning for connection with her was interpreted by her as him judging her for her queerness. Sound like a familiar form of love to an earlier clip? It's also interesting that while Pruitt likely confessed to God about Sarah, he never confessed to the people who mattered until it was way too late. While Pruitt tried to force his love onto Sarah at the last minute, literally and figuratively, for her mom, he slowly poisoned her every day, one-on-one, without her being able to comprehend what's happening, and later taking her in with sweet words once she can. But then she realized he was not the man she loved anymore.
I don't want you going back there, ever again. That is not my church. That is not the man I knew.
Pruitt believes that he's bringing miracles by infecting everyone in the town. His love is what destroys Crockett. Most of all, his love of Mildred and wanting her and him to be able to be young together again. It's why he did everything he did.
Did it ever hurt you?
Yes.
No hate quite like Christian love. Huh. Some Christians view the things they do as being, in the words of the Blues Brothers,
we're on a mission from God.
Christians like Rutherford County Juvenile Court Judge Donna Scott Davenport, who said to a newspaper, "I'm here on a mission. It's God's mission," about her work. Her work being locking up children at a staggering rate of 48% of cases referred, compared to the state average of 5%. LinkedIn Sources' reporter Ken Armstrong's coverage. The story Ken covers is about horrific treatment of children at the hands of police and the law system as set out by this women's mission from God. Apparently that mission involves black kids being arrested for the crime of seeing a fight and not stopping it. I have a feeling their real crime to the oxymoronically monikered Honorable Judge Davenport is existing. We see this type of thinking embodied in the show by Bev, in particular towards Joe Colley. And as we discussed earlier, Hassan, Bev makes it clear that she sees Joe as a sinner throughout the show. She's bothered by his dog Pike, who has never hurt anyone, because it barked at her, so she poisons the animal to punish Joe. She feels this is perfectly okay to do because she's punishing a sinner. For Joe, this is one of the only things in the world that treats him as a person. It's his baby boy. In the scene when Pike passes, he talks about Pike being a completely innocent creature who never hurt anything.
You don't like me? That's fine. Shit I done, I don't care about me so much either. But what did he ever do?
When Hassan goes to talk to Bev about this, she plays ignorant about the dog and even tries to imply that Hassan would do it, despite us knowing that she did it. Hassan goes to talk to Joe, and we see Bull is helping fix his engine. Hassan says Bull's a drug dealer, but Joe responds,
"Not when he's here, he's not. And he's about the only person on this island treats me like a human being, so if that's the reason, well, I kind of wish all you assholes was drug dealers."
Hassan explains that he can't charge Bev. Joe's expecting to be treated as a liar, but Hassan validates him that he's
not wrong, Joe.
Thank you.
A moment where Joe feels like his humanity is being recognized. We see through the later episodes Joe open up and begin to connect with other people and deal with his alcoholism and experience joy and wanting to live again. And then he fucking dies, and Mike ripped my heart out with this scene.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
As Joe bleeds out, as if the scene was not upsetting enough, Pruitt sucks his blood out like a human leech. When Bev finds out what happened, she justifies the murder of Joe and convinces other Christians that this is actually acting for God. When she enters, she finds Pruitt in shock, mumbling,
I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Hush.
And just acts like it's nothing, and then gets Sturge and Wade to help cover up the murder. When Wade yells,
"What the hell did you do?"
she slaps Wade and then uses scripture to berate him and Sturge into believing that it was deserved. That
he's a sinner, a lech, and a heathen of the first order. He's a maimer of children and a blessing to no one, and God has called in his dead.
What's especially sad is that Pruitt had heard Joe's confession, and by all means should have understood that he was wrong for murdering Joe.
I heard your confession today, and God forgave you.
That God had, in his belief system, forgiven Joe. But for Pruitt, it's easier for himself, for his position and power, to agree with this, to see murder as justified, than to face the truth that what he did was monstrous. He continues to justify actions of harm for his own benefit. Later on, Bev uses the mentality from this scene to justify unleashing the undead onto the city against Pruitt's request and committing mass murder. She thinks she's on a mission from God to punish sinners. I hope that reminds you of something from earlier. Because what this show is talking about is real. There are real Christians with real power who believe and act like Bev. But Christians are not all like her, and she's not a mustache-twirling villain. She's someone possessed by an ideology, an interpretation, but not the only interpretation. In the third episode, Lisa comes to Joe's place. She asks about the gun that paralyzed her.
This is my grandfather's gun. The other one, that one, I threw it into the bay. Couldn't look at it anymore.
And then she explains what her experience of getting shot was like, that she has hated Joe.
I hate you. Honesty is important, so we'll start there. I want you to beg for my forgiveness so that I can tell you no.
I'm sorry.
Damn right you're sorry!
But then she reveals why she came there that day. It was to forgive him.
I forgive you, and I see you now.
And she's still angry, but it's different now.
The only thing standing in my way was hate. The only thing standing in your way is you.
And she believes this because of Christianity. Part of this show's message, which Mike repeatedly talks about in his essay on writing it, is the incredible power of forgiveness. It can be beautiful, and I believe this scene completely. And it makes the tragedy of Joe Colley so much harder to see, because after this moment, he starts getting out of his own way. We are meant to see the beauty of forgiveness throughout the show. The ending of the show is also about this, that even the worst of us can be saved. We see a moment between various people who are gripped by ideological vampirism forgive each other before passing away in the cleansing light of a spring sunrise. What I think is important about Lisa forgiving Joe is that Lisa's forgiveness is genuine and a choice, not an obligation. Many Christians and culturally Christian people view forgiveness as something that is morally owed, and that if you don't forgive, that's a personal failure. In the words of Alexander Pope, to err is human, to forgive, divine. In the fourth episode, Ed Flynn attempts to reconcile with Riley. Ed feels compelled to seek forgiveness from his son, but he does it in a way that ambushes Riley when Ed is ready, but not when Riley is. He offloads all his negative feelings and emotions towards Riley over the years onto him in a misguided attempt to explain and apologize for his cold, distant demeanor towards him, blaming Riley for it. There's no space given to Riley for him to express his misgivings, hard feelings, or experiences. He is expected to forgive his dad without any understanding, work, or real communication coming from Ed. Ed is centralizing his emotions to the absolute exclusion of Riley's, and placing the obligation of emotional work on his son. I think that this parallels the Catholic idea of confession, where you offload your sin, your hurt, your faults, onto the priest to seek absolution, rather than it being an interaction and process of understanding those you hurt. It centralizes the perpetrator. There's an aspect of feeling entitled to forgiveness as well. Some Christians' concept of forgiveness in general is informed by their interpretation of what confession at the church means. I remember growing up how the kids who harmed me would get the lightest amount of, "That was not okay." And then the teacher, principal, authority figure would demand I forgive them, because if I didn't, then I was the bad one. At times I would actually get punished for protecting myself because bullying me was okay. I was a bad. But me hurting them in self-defense was not. I always hated the scripture saying if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also, because I don't think letting people abuse you is righteous. And I don't think forgiving them as they continue to harm you and while they show no remorse is either. This idea that you have to forgive, that it is owed and you are morally failing if you don't do it is, to me, harmful. I don't owe my abusers forgiveness, and I will choose to give it if I want to and when I am ready, not for them, but for me. I should not be expected to forgive people I know kept doing the harm they did to me to others to be able to move on. Fundamentally, my problem with this view of forgiveness is that it places the onus and moral responsibility on the person harmed and not the one doing harm. It ignores that it's a process that takes time, and trying to force someone to speed that up is not productive. As well, the placement of moral value creates a feeling of guilt in the person that was harmed. Frankly, I don't think we should be making people feel bad because forgiving abusers is not something they're comfortable with. I think forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation, and when, but most importantly, if you choose to forgive someone, that is something you do for yourself, not for them. Not because you owe those who harmed you something. Some people take me saying things like this as me being against forgiveness, but that could not be further from the truth. I just think it's more complicated not to be thrown out lightly. At the beginning of section 3, I mentioned the first time I had someone directly say I didn't deserve to live. What I didn't mention was that in high school, that kid and I would reconcile our complicated past. That after getting to know and understand each other, that I would forgive them after they apologized. That they were one of the first people I came out to. Forgiveness is wonderful when it occurs genuinely and it's a choice, and especially when the other person recognizes the harm they did. It's incredible. I have forgiven a lot of people who have hurt me, but it should never be an obligation. It should never be forced onto someone who's not ready, willing, or able to give it, but instead a process and a choice that is up to the victim. The show is very clear that Christians are not some inherent evil, but that people use the religion as a weapon. Lisa, one of the embodiments of positive Christianity, said to Joe,
"If God can forgive you, then I can forgive you."
And she, the person he hurt most, forgave him and encouraged him to be a better person. But Bev interpreted things as God not forgiving Joe, but instead striking him down, that he deserved that punishment, and later that everyone who didn't attend the midnight mass was undeserving of life, what she viewed as the book of Revelation occurring on earth.
Those who've been coming to church and taking communion, they have nothing to fear tonight. As for the rest of them, let God sort them out. All of us, apart.
Lisa is not the only example of acting out a positive Christianity. We also see this in Mildred. As said earlier, she recognized the harmful nature of what Pruitt was preaching. But most of all, we see it in Erin. When Erin was younger, she had very little faith. Her mother was horrifically abusive, so she ran away, and she found herself in a relationship with an abusive man and realized she had run from her mom to marry someone just like her. But when Erin got pregnant, she knew she could not let the baby she loved experience what she did, and she returned to Crockett and found God. Faith saved her, and that's beautiful. Erin's strong convictions help her reconnect with Riley and to later take what she learns from him to try and save everyone in the town. She does the heroic things that she does to stop the spread of the plague coming from the church because of love. Love of people and of humanity and of God. In the hands of Pruitt or Bev, there's no hate quite like Christian love, but I don't think that's true of Lisa or Mildred, and it's not true of Erin either. In the third episode, she pushes back against Bev's proselytizing and supports Hassan.
This is a public school, and he's absolutely right.
As we saw with Hassan, his convictions and faith to help others is also extremely positive in the shows and my view. Faith isn't the enemy. Fanaticism is. Our heroes, the people we root for, embrace death with grace and dignity. Hassan and Ali praying to the morning sun, Riley letting it wash over him, Erin fighting back and then passing into a dream of love, and Sarah refusing resurrection, all of them doing this to save humanity. Well, those who did harm fought against it. Pruitt's fight against it is what dooms the town, and Bev desperately scratched the ground near Hassan looking for anything that could save her from the beauty of the sun. At the end, Pruitt realizes he was wrong. In my opinion, it was way too late, but he sits with Mildred in Sarah's body, waiting for the cleansing light. A martyr is someone who dies for the sake of a principle or for not rejecting their beliefs. When Pruitt tries to turn his dying daughter into a vampire against her will to force his beliefs onto Sarah, she spits that up. Sarah dies for her beliefs and convictions, a martyr. Riley dies trying to undo harm. He dies the first time out of care and concern for Joe. He went back because Pruitt lied about Joe, and that worried him. He dies a second time out of his conviction to save those he loved, out of a conviction to reject Pruitt's beliefs, represented by the blood forced into him. He dies a martyr for his specific beliefs, too. Hassan dies for his beliefs of love and care for others, dies because of his love for humanity and his love of Allah and of the principles of his Muslim faith, and he gets to pray one last time. He too is a martyr. Lastly, Erin is in many ways a classical Christian martyr. She dies for her Christian beliefs, killed by the physical embodiment of a corrupt, destructive, and misused Christian system, but one that she tears at from below with a knife as it feasts on her, causing its death. She fought so others could live. In an earlier episode, she discusses her philosophy of death with Riley.
And that's what we mean when we say heaven. No mansions, no rivers of diamonds or fluffy clouds or angel wings. You are loved, and you aren't alone.
Riley says that he thinks it ends with one last incredible dream, that his body stops.
Clinical death.
As the brain cells die, his brain floods with DMT, and he dreams of his memory and imagination, and it's
a curtain call. Dream to end all dreams, and then I stop.
And all the things that make him up become one with the universe. The bacteria keep living and eating, and he's feeding life. With what we're shown, I think they were both right. Because they dream and remember, and they are not alone, and they are loved when they die. Christians celebrate martyrs as saints. I hope they can recognize the heroism in the acts of these characters, even if their beliefs differ. These last scenes for our characters are both beautiful and painful, uplifting and heart-wrenching, and most of all, they are human.
While you're at it, ask him why he always takes the kids, or the drunk fucks walk away with scratches.
In the first AA meeting, we start with Pruitt getting Riley to do the prayer Serenity.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Riley talks about how Bev convinced people that the settlement for the oil spill was a gift from God, that they should take it and give some to her by giving it to the church.
From the start, it seemed like a lot of money, I guess, until you hold it up against a couple years of lost wages, but...
She built the rec center to get attention off her taking so much money.
Churches just popping up like that, plump little ticks sucking the town dry.
As Joe puts it,
I mean, why not just name it Bev Keene's Money Laundry? That's all it really was.
Pruitt points out how Riley didn't lack for faith younger in his life. Riley discusses how RR, rational recovery,
It's based more on reason and psychology, recognizing the addictive voice inside. It's not that I want to drink, it's that the addictive voice wants to.
Pruitt responds asking if it's about making yourself the higher power, and rails against that. Pruitt talks about how alcohol is not good or bad, but it's people, which is that essentializing I was talking about earlier. He says alcohol causes suffering.
God can take that pain and turn it into something good. Suffering can be a gift.
While Riley agrees alcohol's not good or bad, but the version of himself when drunk was bad, not that he was bad. And then he finally says,
I killed someone. So who's to blame there? I am to blame there. God. But he just kind of let it happen, didn't he?
That a higher power lets people off the hook. Because the idea of suffering as a gift from God can justify standing by while horrible things happen.
What a monstrous idea, Father.
And when I watch this, I think about people saying my chronic illness, my mom's cancer, the needless deaths of countless young people whose funerals I have attended is all part of God's plan. I don't think a built-in belief that can justify suffering as a gift from God is anything but harmful, because if it is a gift, not just that a gift from the Almighty, then of course people won't agree with trying to relieve people of that suffering. Beliefs in general that encourage letting suffering occur in Christian denominations. When kids die because they are not allowed to receive blood because of the religious beliefs of their Jehovah's Witness parents, how can you not see that as a monstrous choice to make? Interpretation and faith matters. The words can mean one thing to one person and another to someone else. The second AA meeting occurs after the miracle at St. Patrick's. Riley feels he can explain everything except how Pruitt knew that Lisa would walk, because if he was wrong, he would have lost the trust of the town for doing what he did to Lisa. Pruitt says it's a feeling. We learn later it's because those who have consumed vampire blood feel interconnected. There's an explanation for the unexplainable event, reinforcing Riley's point from the start of the conversation.
All our myths, our religions, come from natural occurrences that we can't explain.
The third AA meeting, Joe joins them because of Lisa's forgiveness. Pruitt gets angry at Riley for not feeling comfortable saying something, and he raises his voice for one of the first times, and so Riley talks.
You showed up, Joe. You're here. That's enough. It won't be forever, but for tonight it is. For tonight, it's everything.
Because forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, which Joe is struggling with, is a process and a choice, and step one is showing up and choosing to work through it. After the meeting, Joe talks about how he feels.
Maybe my life might be worth.
The part that makes things so tragic is that Pruitt's clearly capable of good things, that he's been helpful to Joe and Riley, and his actions result in both of them dying because of his ideological viewpoint, as he becomes gripped in fanaticism. The fourth AA meeting occurs after Joe's death and Erin losing her child, and Erin and Riley discussing death. Pruitt lies about Joe, saying he left to see his sister off-island, the sister Riley knows is dead. Pruitt says words feel hollow comforting someone on death, when Riley asks what Pruitt would say to Erin, and Pruitt also says,
We must trust in the Lord with our whole heart and not rely on our own insights.
He's clearly trying to internally justify what happened with Joe.
I don't understand, and I will not. Yes, sometimes that's okay.
Pruitt's fully unquestioningly just doing whatever he feels like and then saying it's the will of God. He's drinking the Kool-Aid. He won't be the last one. The final meeting occurs after Riley is killed and resurrected. Pruitt promises that he will explain everything. He says I promise many times while insisting that Riley will be happy with this. His use of the prayer Serenity here feels almost ironic. He talks about when he lied about resurrecting a mouse Riley brought him when he was young. He tries to argue that this lie was an act of God because it made Riley believe for a long time, which Riley points out that it very clearly was not, also revealing that he's not Paul Hill but actually Pruitt. Pruitt interpreted Riley coming back the previous night as him being compelled by God because...
I've known you your whole life. Never once have you just shown up in the night.
But it was not because of that. It was because Pruitt had lied about Joe. No act of God, just a misguided old fool covering his own tracks. Riley scoffs at Pruitt's statements. This also highlights that Pruitt has been lying for a very long time to do things he thinks are beneficial to faith. Pruitt, after revealing he killed Joe, says,
He was beyond repair. Well, it's a cliche to say that the Lord works in mysterious ways.
We see once again that the idea of essentializing someone as unchanging leads to justification of harm. Interestingly, this is also a contradiction of Pruitt's earlier statements about suffering being a potential good, as he tries to justify Joe dying as a mercy because...
Joe was suffering, and he was suffering for no reason.
It's also a lie. Joe was doing better. Once again, touching on interpretation, rather than seeing it for the monster it is, Pruitt interpreted the creature as being an angel because...
When they encounter an angel in the Bible, they are frightened.
What's also interesting is when Bev comes in, we see him hold back Riley, even though earlier he talked about how wanting to feed was God acting through him. If that hunger and desire to attack is coming from God, should Riley not have attacked Bev right then? Especially when it's immediately followed by Pruitt talking about having the angel move through him to take Joe and be nourished. Pruitt felt no guilt and wrestled with that, but Bev Keane led him to an interpretation using scriptures so that he felt his murder was justified. Pruitt keeps trying to insist.
Well, there is meaning here. There is purpose here.
And then Pruitt talks about not feeling guilty, escalating and asking how that makes Riley feel until...
How does it make you feel?
Pruitt interprets his lack of guilt as righteous, and to me, and I think the show as well, it's heinous. One cannot take responsibility if one cannot see one's failures. What Pruitt is doing is a continued view of, if I admit that I took this action, then the action's fine, rather than engaging in a process of trying to change from doing harmful things. He has progressively done more harmful things. At first, it was just the lies, and that caused Bull's death, and the death of Erin's baby. And then it's a murder, and then it's the death of the entire town. He confesses, but only when it benefits his power and position and viewpoint. It's self-serving. He's not building a relationship with faith, but instead using faith for his own gain. A sword.
But a sword! It was Jesus who said that. Jesus Christ himself, so if you want to question him... Now wait, if you want to pick and choose which one of his works...
In episode 2, Pruitt says everything has its season, strange words to come from one who refuses to let things go until the very last moment of his life. Interesting as well is his parting words to Riley.
But whoever you choose to enter communion with, as they eat of your body and drink of your blood, and you of theirs, and you are in the communion of saints.
He, in a way, is placing himself as the higher power manifested, which he pushed against in the second episode, because in the end, everything he's done has been for himself. Just like Bev was when she convinced people to mass donate after she convinced them to take the settlements that ended up hurting them. Just like the various megachurches who claim to provide salvation while ripping money from impoverished people so a millionaire preacher can buy a second yacht. It's the use of religion to manipulate others, to control others, to get away with harm, and to build up one's ego. It has disastrous and disturbing consequences. In the 5th episode, Pruitt goes on a grand speech about
God's army,
where he says morality changes, an admission that he has let his morals go for his own power. Bev interprets who dies to benefit her own views. She hates them and is happy to see them gone, so she says it's an act of God because it benefits her. Hypocrisy creeps in all over Bev's and Pruitt's interpretations of events. In the last episode, Bev burns every building in the city, including burning people alive in their own homes, and then has the audacity to scream at Hassan.
You would burn us in our homes?
While many interpretations are harmful, I think there's one aspect that is most damaging of all.
We are here to bless you, to keep you.
Christianity is a death cult. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. Let's examine what it means. Death cults, or more formally, destructive cults, are religious groups that glorify and obsess over death and that have caused or are liable to cause loss of life amongst their membership or the general public. You've likely heard of the most famous example, Jonestown, famous for the Jonestown Massacre, in which 909 of its members drank a lethal dose of cyanide mixed with a powdered drink mix after calling for a mass meeting. It's the source of the rather morbid saying I used earlier, drinking the Kool-Aid. Midnight Mass makes direct purposeful comparison between this event and the moment when Pruitt is converting the town to murderous vampires, down to the townspeople coming for a meeting and drinking a poison mixed into something else, which kills them. On top of this, there are direct parallels made to the way that some churches have encouraged people getting sick from the illness during this.
You don't have to wear the mask. You got Jesus. You don't need the vaccine. You got Jesus.
You're telling me there's a contagion being spread intentionally at St. Patrick's?
It's disturbing how denominations have embraced death into their space during this, and I cannot help but think that some of these lines were added after the delay and due to this, considering how much of the script was changed to add the oil spill to explain the lack of extras caused by filming restrictions. Not just that, there's a disturbing layer of similarity in the virus of the show and that of... They both affect the blood of the carrier, but in opposite ways. While the real-world equivalent can cause permanent organ damage and affect the elderly and those with the pre-existing conditions the most, the virus in the show heals them the most. An inversion of death that I think is saying something about death cult's view on dying, that it can be healing. What I find fascinating is that the show examines the death cult aspects of Christianity through inverting them, by making it an obsession with a physical, everlasting life and a different form of glorifying dying. The reasons Christianity is a death cult lie primarily in the Book of Revelation, an apocalyptic text that is about how the end of the world is always approaching. It's just around the corner, and it will stop all the ills of the world as everyone worthy dies and goes to heaven for life everlasting. Because within Christianity, it is very easy to interpret it as saying that death is desirable. After all, when you die, you go to heaven, into a beautiful, endless, positive existence. Time on earth, merely about getting yourself to heaven, but not truly about living here and now. Why suffer the mortal world when you can be where you belong? When Hamlet contemplates death at his own hand, he says, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream."
Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil.
Who would fair dales bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something beyond death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to those we know not of. But if you're absolutely certain that you've discovered that country, why stay? Well, sin, of course. Isn't it interesting? They'd invent something to explicitly stop people from seeking out heaven on their own. But what if you are a sin who is only suffering here and can only expect to suffer on the other side? Why stay? The only response I've found is love. Anyway, remember when I said the chunky blood wine pulled me out? I was actually joking. It's a brilliant statement on how the followers drink from the words of harm, ignoring the warning signs out of a fanatical obedience. Drink the blood and partake of the flesh and receive life everlasting. Sound familiar? Pruitt's interpretation of events is comprehensible. It's easy. It gives him what he wants. He partook of the blood and body of what he interpreted to be his Lord and gained life everlasting. Anyway, this comparison to Jonestown both highlights Christianity's sometimes harmful relationship with death and how fanaticism can envelop a group and result in horrific actions. In the same episode, the Christians go out with torches that result in visuals eerily reminiscent of another group of blood-sucking, pale monsters. The neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, another group fanatically doing horrific things. The lighting of houses is reminiscent of various Christian white supremacist groups burning of houses and towns, especially those of people of color. I think these visual parallels are very purposeful to draw attention to how belief can be galvanized and turned into violent action. In the words of Lady Knight the Brave, the whole show is a very good parable for how Christianity radicalizes people and can turn them into hate mobs, but it also acknowledges personal culpability because after the town gets turned, we see some people don't go on a murder spree. Some people have the presence of mind to say, hey, what if I didn't? This show both engages with the way that belief can be used for creating harm, but that people also need to personally be attentive and reject these things. Mildred and Aaron, when they reject the church for what it's doing, for example, and during the night of the Mass, Riley's parents do not participate in the harm. Not just that, before she turns, Riley's mom also distracts and protects our heroes while reading Bev for filth in the most polite Christian way. She even does the sign of the cross first.
Bev, I want you to listen to me, because your whole life I think you've needed to hear this. You aren't a good person.
And Bev can't even handle that. Annie continues.
God doesn't love you more than anyone else, and you certainly aren't a victim.
And when Bev tries to use Riley's memory against her by blaming her for her son's problems, she says,
God loves him just as much as he loves you, Bev. Why does that upset you so much?
It upsets Bev because she wants to feel special and superior. It upsets her feelings of power and placement as feeling in control of the mob. But the people with actual control are Annie and Ali and Ed, who don't join in harming others, even when they have the hunger to do so. People are capable of rising above that pull to hate and do incredible things. At the end of the night, in the worst of it, in the absence of light and hope, they sing. People are not black and white. They are beautiful and disgusting tapestries of grays and so many hues of color that mingle into gorgeous and horrifying images, but even those dominated by ill have moments of light and brilliance. No one's all good, we're all bad, and we're all capable of both, and there are things we have no control over, but for the things we do, it's up to us to choose to make things better. In the slightly modified words of American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, quoted at each AA meeting of the show, I hope you are granted the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'll keep doing my best to do the same.
Everything else is pictures, picked up along the way.
What I hope I've made very clear by now is that the harm that Midnight Mass discusses is representative of very real phenomena, that there are real people who use religion to act out harm. When I first watched the show, I couldn't figure out why the first shot affected me so deeply. When I watched it a second time, I realized what it was. It was the ichthys on the back of the vehicle. That simple fish has haunted me every time I get out of my vehicle into a parking lot. Because 3 months ago, a good old Christian boy in his truck with a nice big ichthys and a Conservative Party of Canada on the back stared me in the eyes, stepped on his accelerator, and tried to run me over for the sin of being trans in public. The hate that burned in his eyes was the same as the fictional hate of Bev Keane and the all too real hate in the eyes of Christian white men marching in Charlottesville. I want you to remember all of this because I don't get to stop thinking about that truck every time I get out of my vehicle for groceries. I want you to remember it, and I want you to push against it when you see it. When you see hate and fanaticism spreading like the virus in the blood poured into the throats of Pruitt's followers, when you see that slow seeping poison ensconcing into the mind, I want you to fight back against it. I promised earlier we would have a positive note, though. A ray of hope cresting the horizon like the sun as it crept through the smoke of a burning crocket. So now we get to the positive part of my past. Well, yes, a lot of the harm I received was from Christians. I can also tell you the only reason I was not consumed by the narrative that I'm not deserving of living was because of the love that certain people showed me at the right time. Some of them did the positive things they did because they genuinely did follow the doctrines on love found in the Christian Bible. So, to those few people who said the right things at the right time when I was young and struggling, thank you for reminding me that love and kindness do exist outside of my family. There was a time where I thought that was the only place it could exist. I am eternally thankful to you that I'm still alive, still here, that I know what joy is. I need you to understand and truly listen when I say I don't hate all Christians, but I do hate your institutions. I hate what your religion has done and continues to do. I am on Treaty 6 unceded indigenous land in a country where the bodies of indigenous children are dug up from the grounds of Christian schools because of a Christian colonialist project. Because Christianity has a body count that I'm not sure we will ever fully be able to calculate. So when you hear these words I say, I hope you're angry as a Christian. But I must ask, what are you angry at? Because if you're angry at me and not at the institutions and people in power who have used your religion, your God, your Christ, as a weapon against marginalized people, against innocent people, against other Christians, then I question whether you believe in Jesus at all. Because your Christ represented love and care of others, especially those most damaged and marginalized by society. So if you are angry at those who have done harm with your faith, go out and act on your faith and change things, change those institutions, uplift those harmed by them, and do more than just saying you're one of the good ones. In his poem Christianity for Heathens, from his book The Backwater Sermons, trans-Christian author J. Hume says, "Love everyone as if everyone is holy, as if everyone's intrinsically worthy, as if the streets are strewn with Christ taking naps in empty doorways. Know this, if you know anything at all. Life is no challenge, nor test. Life is love. Reflect it back in abundance."
Religion, I believe, is one of the ways we attempt to answer the two great questions that ache within us all. How shall we live? And what happens when we die? As far as I can tell, though, the second question only matters in how it affects the first.
I think Midnight Mass is a continuation of a conversation Mike and his collaborators have been having throughout their work about death and life. As Mike put it,
I want all of my projects to be just a big ball of rubber bands by the time we're done. Just impossible to extricate from each other.
In the end of The Haunting of Hill House, Nell says,
There's no without. I am not gone. I loved you completely, and you loved me the same. That's all. The rest is confetti.
And when we see Hannah's ghost for the last time in Bly Manor, she asks Henry to tell Owen.
Tell him I love him. And the rest, well, it's just...
The last word cut off, only making full sense if you've seen Hill House. And in Midnight Mass, Aaron says,
And that's what we mean when we say heaven. No mansions, no rivers of diamonds or fluffy clouds or angel wings. You are loved, and you aren't alone.
For those who had love in their life, that is how they pass in Midnight Mass. They are loved, and they are not alone. Riley reminded Pruitt that the Bible says we are dust, and to dust we shall return, a saying given on Ash Wednesday, a day about the brevity of life. In the end, it all comes down to love, at least in these shows. I don't know what happens when we die, but I know our love lives on in those we care for, that it transcends death. Regardless of your answer to the second question, what matters is how it affects the first, and to me, we should live guided by love, and the rest is confetti. In Catholic school, as vicious as Roman rule, I got my knuckles bruised by a lady in black, and I held my tongue as she told me, son, fear is the heart of love, so I never went back. If heaven and hell decide that they both are satisfied, illuminate the nose on their vacancy signs. If there's no one beside you when your soul embarks, then I'll